Hey there, everyone. I'm Carson Grubaugh.
I'm Sean Robinson, and we're joined today by a fantastic cartoonist, one of my favorite cartoonists of the past 15 years. Uh, I say 15 years, not because he's been working that long, but that's because when I first became aware of him, Mr. Brandon Graham. Hi, Brandon.
Hello, gentlemen. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks
Hey,
for
thanks for joining us.
talking to us. So thrilled about it. What uh, How did you just pick out this particular book to talk with us?
Oh, I've been obsessed with Appleseed since it came out. I used to go to this comic store in West Seattle and part called White Center, and they put out these little Eclipse extras or previews that Eclipse Comics, a defunct publisher, would put out. And I must have been, I don't know, 14 or 15, and I got one with a cover with Appleseed #1's cover on it, and I remember I just annoyed the guys at the comic store because I would go back constantly and ask if it was out yet. And it might be the only thing in my life that was better than I expected when I finally got got the actual thing. And Appleseed's been a really weird comic in my life because I don't know if I've ever fully understood it, and I go back to it so much. And I talk about it constantly with people as like one of the most impressive comics that I've ever encountered. And I've had people go out and pick it up on my recommendation and then write me back and be like, maybe I got a bad translation. Doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, no, that's the right one.
Oh, that's a very interesting thing because the reputation is definitely that it is denser than the typical manga. There's a pretty interesting interview with Fred Schott. It was one of the Shirow's translators on several of his other works, interviewing him, and basically says to him, "So this is a lot more complicated than everything else being put out in Japan right now, right? Why do you make things so dense? It's difficult for me to translate."
Right.
Well, and I had going back and getting these to do this. This is something I remember seeing when I was in high school in like 94, 95. There were, I was into like Jim Lee and stuff, but there was the guys that were into the manga, and Ghost in the Shell was the big one, and Akira. But I remember seeing Appleseed as well. And with Ghost in the Shell and Appleseed, I remember reading them and being like, I don't know what the fuck's going on in these books. Like, it looks cool, but I don't get it. And that's something I really want to talk about when we look at this is looking at the first chapter now. I get why, but I also get why you find it so compelling from a storytelling perspective, because he is asking a lot of the reader, but there's a purpose to it that there's no way I would have understood that, especially in chapter 1 of book 1. It's just like so kind of intentionally hard to follow, I think.
Because part of it, I was reading this one and I was like, I finally get it now, and I bet that if we keep going through these by book 4, we'll just be like, I don't know what he's doing here. But
yeah, but I get why I would have been like turned off as a kid, but now I'm like, oh yeah, I see it. So that was the immediate first thing I thought reading chapter 1.
Nice.
So it's going to be fascinating to talk about what was going on in there.
Appleseed's a really weird book in that it should be talked about as just one of these formulist masterpieces, but it's like, to get into the Art Spiegelman crowd, they'd have to get past that it's about cyborg cops,
Yeah.
So it's almost like he's created this wall of this like a nerd wall you have to pass through.
But I mean, that's like that makes it even more amazing, because you're gonna ride between you're kind of poking at the biases that people have. So it's really interesting to me.
Yeah, he's definitely daring people to take the genre tropes. He doesn't use them as tropes. Like, it's funny that you tell people like, oh yeah, and so she's got a cyborg boyfriend and she has a mecha that she can get into, and it's like, oh okay, well I've read that before, right? So like Gundam, and it's like, oh no. Gundam is like, yeah, I mean, I don't even want to make the comparison, but he's like thought out all of these details in a way that's so, I mean, almost kind of excruciating in a footnotes kind of sense. But like he's thought out all those details so much that it's not a trope. I mean, it's not like a robot trope. There's no friendly robot who's guiding you through something. It's not like, power fantasy stuff. I mean, it's like genre-less genre fiction.
Yeah, my theory was always with Appleseed that he was trying to make a predictive future book, and that Ghost in the Shell was almost him doing correction on that. Which I think is probably why I like Appleseed more than Ghost in the Shell, is that it seems weirder than the direction that we actually started going.
So do you recognize our society in the first volume anyway of Appleseed?
I mean, I will say that something really weird about Appleseed is it's from the point of view of American characters. Like that kept, like there's a part in the first and the second issue of the series where they start speaking, they go land in Olympus, the like utopian city that it's all set in. And the woman who's guiding them there is like, you guys speak English, so you'll be fine. And it's weird that was written in Japanese.
Right.
Oh, okay. See, that's one of the things I think in translation, I just assume they adjusted it because it makes it, because we're talking about the versions that we got too. Like, I don't know what version I've got. It's not the Dark Horse one, but I didn't know if that was something they just did that because it would be easier for an American audience to just go.
They're supposed to be LA cops.
Right, literally from Los Angeles.
Yeah, except for Briar Rose, the big, her big mecha partner he's a African Russian.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think, like, I haven't read the other 3 volumes that I have them, but I think if we do future videos, it'd be interesting to have a fresh read. So I think you two have a bigger picture of the story, where I was like just starting to figure out all the details, because he doesn't give you the details up front. He throws you into it and you figure it out as you go. So I think, by the time we get to volume 4, or there's 5, right?
Well, 4.5, and maybe he didn't finish the 5th volume, basically, because there was an earthquake.
He was serializing it, unlike the other 4 volumes, which were all put out one at a time, directly to publication, like as a full volume. The 5th one was going to be serialized in a monthly magazine, and he did 4 issues of it. And for whatever reason, I mean, it's not really like a public thing. I don't think he's like talked about it or anything, but he was like, this was not right for Appleseed.
And I might be getting the earthquake right, because at one point he was doing a Ghost in the Shell book that he also basically shelved and was put out later.
Right.
Which is actually much better than the one that he did instead of it. It's really weird. He did like Ghost in the Shell 2 is very computer heavy, and then there's another version of Ghost in the Shell that has like a subtitle, and that one is much more in line with his like previous work.
Right. Well, we should say this is the first volume of Appleseed is literally the first quote unquote professional work that he ever did, which is, I mean, just mind-boggling, absolutely mind-boggling. He was educated as a oil painter and was teaching high school, and some of his pals were really into comics, and allegedly he was not really into comics. We should talk about some of that while we're doing the page through, because I think that there are some arguments both directions as far as influence. But allegedly he was not particularly into comics, but this particular group of friends got him onto some stuff that he really liked. I'm guessing some Otomo probably. And they did a doshinji together. So they all pooled their resources and each did a few short stories. And Black Magic was the resulting work that he did, all while employed as a high school teacher. And Black Magic was published in this doshinji called Atlas, and then Atlas got around to one of the other publishers, was like, who the hell is this guy? And Appleseed is next, and it's it's like a sprint to get to his like mature first style, it seems like to me. I mean, I was kind of like looking for the weakness in the first segment, and I was like, oh, okay, well, it's not really there.
Yeah, it's pretty solid. Yeah, and I think he was 24 when he did this one.
Right.
Wow, that's nuts.
Yeah. But yeah, his career is really kind of short in how much, like, he did a ton of books in a decade and then just didn't anymore.
Yeah, I mean, and you could see some of the, I don't know, well, we could talk about that maybe on the page there, but yeah, it's a very interesting shape to it.
So we've been looking, we all have different volumes of the book, right? Who's got what? As before we start flipping through it.
Oh, sure. I just have, I was actually reading a bootleg digital version of it because mine are in a box somewhere, but I found one issue of the Studio Proteus Eclipse.
Right.
Okay,
comic.
and
then-
that's how you were getting them initially, right? As single floppies.
Yeah, and I should also point out that I have this weird book of the pencils, which I think we talked about before we were recording, but it has these like very small recreations of all the pencils of the first book, frustratingly small, but it's cool to at least see his process.
And Brandon's provided us with some scans of those, so when we flop over to looking at stuff on the screen, we'll have those. And then I think what we're going to do instead of recreating the inks is we're going to take one of the pencils and then all ink it as we see fit, right, when we do the recreation. So that should be pretty interesting. Sean, you got the Dark Horse ones?
I theoretically do. I had, like Brandon, I got obsessed with Appleseed in high school, and I initially bought all of the Eclipse issues as back issues. There was this place nearby my house, what was literally named Giant Comic Book Warehouse. You can probably guess what they had there.
Yeah.
And you could get stacks of stuff, and it was something like 75. It was a sliding scale, you know, pay $1 if you buy a certain amount, and pay 75 cents if you pay a certain amount, and 50 cents. And I got virtually every Eclipse issue of it. I used to have the Dark Horse collections, which were fairly large, and then the later Dark Horse collections are fairly small. And I've just got 2 of those right now.
Okay.
I got rid of almost all of my books in 2011 due to various personal circumstances, moving, you know, traveling around the world for a while, and didn't want to put stuff in storage.
Okay.
But I've got number 1 on the way. Too late for this conversation, but I reread it, and like you were saying, Brandon, I really felt like this is the first time that I really understood it. I think I had a very surface level understanding of it before, and I sort of was overawed by the complexity before, specifically like I guess density is really what I'm looking for, not necessarily like complexity. Well, there's a density to it that was sort of, I think, intimidating to me in my early reads.
It's interesting in the serialization too, because the first issue of the American Appleseed is just a post-apocalyptic war zone battle, and then by issue 2 on, it is just they're in a city dealing with politics, and it ends with some more action stuff, but it's this kind of this false front.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I found. I guess we could start just looking at the book now. So Sean's talking about having I went ahead and got the Dark Horse. So those are like ones, regular American trade size, and then this one that I got because we couldn't find I thought this is what I ordered. What I ordered was apparently some smaller version by Manga Books. So that's what we'll be flipping through, is the smaller, like standard manga sized one. But yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at that.